Okay, so to get started here, some of you have sort of answered this a little bit, but maybe we could go around and get some fuller answers from people. Um, and that is, when did you decide, boy, I need to go to graduate school? And what was it that led you to that decision? And why don't we start with David?
Yeah, okay, I can go first. Um, I was fortunate enough to do a decent amount of undergraduate research at the U. So I spent a little over 2 years working in an undergrad lab, or working as an undergrad in a research lab. And I really enjoyed that working style, sort of the open-ended problem solving. Um, and I also talked a lot with my peers who had done co-ops in sort of more in fields that were sort of more what you would do if you just left with your bachelor's in chemical engineering. And I decided that I would prefer to do more of a research oriented career. And so that led me to pursuing a PhD, because then that opens the door to all those research careers.
All right. Sophia, something that sort of told you I need to go to graduate school?
Yeah, so it was about my fall semester of senior year that I actually wanted to go into industry first. And I started applying to a lot of jobs that mostly focusing on simulations engineering and like the development of control systems on space vehicles. But a common theme I was told by the people I interviewed with was that I needed more of the theory under my belt, and people that got the jobs were usually master's or PhD students. So that was a pretty clear indication to me that I needed at least a master's to be able to do the job I wanted to do. And I was really interested in the work I was doing for my honors thesis. So it just kind of seemed like a clear shot to go on and do my master's here.
Thanks. Chelsea, for you, it was a little bit of a career change, it sounds like. Maybe you could.
Yeah. So I knew immediately graduating that if I wanted to go into mental health, I would need to get an advanced degree. So I went in kind of knowing I wanted to go back to graduate school, but when I decided that mental health really wasn't the path that I wanted to take, I took some time, reflected, realized I wanted to go into nursing, and then just decided I didn't want to get a second bachelor's. It felt kind of lateral. I was interested in being more of an advanced practice provider to begin with. I was interested in more leadership opportunities, and I was interested in sort of being at the table where decisions were made, being involved in treatment decisions. So I thought that an advanced degree, whether that's a master's or a DNP, a PhD, whatever that looks like, was the appropriate step for me.
Thanks. Teddy, I know a little bit more about your story, but why don't you share it with everybody else here?
Sure, yeah. So I came to the U knowing that I wanted to go to grad school in history. I did not really know what grad school meant or really was, but I just knew that I wanted to keep on studying history after, being done at the U. So, and the kind of process that I went in a weird way, and in the way I met Tim was there was an information session on the Beinecke Scholarship, which is basically like a grant that gives you money to go to grad school. I can get into it a little more. But in part of that process, and part of the process of looking for a recommendation letter, I actually met my undergrad advisor who would become my research advisor. And that kind of applying for the Beinecke was like a really eye-opening experience, and it's kind of almost like a practice run for applying for grad school. So I learned a lot about grad school through that process, which was, if anyone is considering research in the humanities, I highly recommend that. So yeah, that kind of confirmed my, interest, and that's how I learned what grad school is and everything. So yeah.
Okay, great. And maybe that moves us on to the question of how did you all decide where you were going to graduate school, and sort of take us through that process of looking at schools and applying and deciding on a particular place that would be right for you. And we can start with anybody who wants to kick us off.
I can go for it again. Um, At the time, I was most interested in catalysis, which is this sort of subset of chemical engineering that I could go into if you're interested, but I don't think it's totally relevant to the discussion. And so I was interested in this subset of catalysis. And so I was talking with professors in the department about what they thought would be a good, or which schools they thought I should apply to, who had the best graduate programs in that field. And then that's how I narrowed down the list of schools to apply to. And then I ended up making my decision from the campus visits. And so I was fortunate enough to be able to come and visit Purdue after I'd been accepted. And I was really impressed with all of the professors and the students that I met, the research opportunities that they described having. And based on all the schools I visited, it was sort of the clear winner where I thought it'd be the most satisfying and fulfilling grad school experience. So it was, for me, it was the visit that really cemented my decision.
Chelsea, you just had to get to Manhattan. Was that what?
Yeah. So to be perfectly frank, a lot of what guided my own decision was I don't want to take the GRE. I don't want to take it. I don't feel like I need to take it. I don't feel like it's an accurate reflection of what kind of student I am going to be. I was a strong performer in undergrad. So I was looking at entry-level nursing master's programs. I was looking at places that I didn't need to take the GRE, and that's a lot of places at a lot of really good schools. You know, there's Columbia, Yale is the same way, University of California, San Francisco, Vanderbilt, all of these are places where I applied. I knew I wanted to go out of state. It was important for me, for my own personal growth, to push myself to be a little bit more challenged as an individual and as a student. It just happened that New York was kind of where I ended up. And then I did get some nice financial aid from Columbia as well. That really helped cement the decision. And then they also had the seamless transition from the master's into the DNP that I really was attracted to.
Okay, thank you. And Sophia, you decided to stay right here at the University of Minnesota.
Yes, I did. So when I was looking at graduate schools, I think what guided me was, first deciding what area I wanted to focus on. So the area of controls. And then I talked to my research advisor at the time to kind of see like what best programs there would be for me. But I think ultimately why I decided to stay was just because the project I was working on for my thesis just gave me the perfect opportunity to transition into a master's thesis. So like I really enjoyed the work I was doing and I wanted to continue it. So I just decided to stay here, and I also really like it here. So even if it is cold, I think for me, it was just a good choice.
So then, Teddy, apart from the 70-degree days in February,
Yeah.
Why Penn?
So I think like David said, I spoke with my advisor and he gave me a set of places to apply to. And, and I was actually quite shocked. Didn't really picture myself like applying for Ivy League institutions and everything. It was a little bit intimidating, but, and to be honest, part of the process too is that sometimes I applied during it's always a competitive process. I don't know how COVID has affected this, but it was a very particularly competitive year when I applied. And something that is worth mentioning that, sometimes you can have a master's applying for a PhD program, but you don't need one. A lot of people don't have them. But in my year, in the cohort that ended up coming in, there were like 9 out of 11 of us had masters, not me being one. So it was a very competitive year, especially if you're applying out of undergrad. And I got in off the wait list at the very last moment at Penn. So that's how it worked out. Penn wasn't, I only applied to, I think 5 or 6 schools. I only applied to schools that I absolutely knew that I'd want to go to with solid funding packages, which I think we'll get into a little bit later. But yeah, and it worked out. And something that I would say, I was not thinking about this, but I'm glad, it has worked out. Like Philadelphia is a great place to live. It's very affordable. And you're picking a place that is, if you're doing a PhD, you're picking a place where you're going to be living for at least 5 years, probably more. So, that should also be something, you might want to think about, which I really wasn't at the time, but I'm glad it's worked out.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Can I actually add on to something Teddy said?
Absolutely.
So one of the things that I think I didn't appreciate going into the application process is just how much the process sort of qualitatively changes when you have such smaller groups of people applying to programs. So there's much more like one-on-one interactions or relationships that can change the application process. So Teddy mentioned getting in at the very last minute. The same thing happened to me. I got accepted to Purdue, I think 2 weeks before I had to make the decision. And then they quick had me visit by myself. And I ended up getting in at the last minute because I reached out to a professor and sort of like talked to him about my options. And he said, like, email them again and like say that you're still interested. And then me emailing them again at the last minute is what got me into Purdue, like right at the very end. And so I think that's something that I just like totally took for granted, didn't think that would be important, but sort of those one-on-one relationships make a much bigger difference for PhD admissions, as far as I can tell, than like undergrad admissions. So
I remember sending a very similar email. So yeah, it's very true.
Okay, good information to know. If you are listening out there and you have a specific question, please feel free to type it into the Q&A, and I will pass that along to our panelists. Meanwhile, let's talk a little bit about how graduate school is different from your undergraduate experience. You know, what surprised you about it? What has stood out as noticeable differences? Are there particular ways in which UHP or the University of Minnesota prepared you well for what you're doing now? And go ahead and start with anybody who wants.
I could start. So something I've noticed is that there's definitely less focus on coursework in my graduate career. Like last semester, I had 3 classes, and that was considered a lot, which, like, you know, going into it, I was like, 3 classes is easy. But now I've learned, and I only have 2 classes, and that's much better. But you also, like, I'm also a TA, so I need to learn how to focus my coursework as well as TA stuff, and then obviously doing research as well. And I think I had pretty decent time management just from my undergrad career, like from working part-time and being involved with student groups. But I think the hardest part about graduate school is trying to allocate time to research, because it's such a vague task. And sometimes it's really hard to have tangible goals. So it's been really difficult for me learning, just like, you know, I'm going to do this thing, and then it takes me way longer than I thought it would. And then it's like at the end of the week, I don't have any like tangible things that I did. I'm just like, I researched this thing for 10 hours. I still don't know what it is. But yeah. So I think that's been hardest for me and the most different part from undergraduate.
yeah, I think I'll jump on after that comment, because that I think is similar to some of my experiences. I think the biggest difference is that, especially if you're doing a PhD and you finished your coursework. So I had to do like a year of coursework, but then after that, it just becomes completely open-ended research and TAing. So there's really no structure. I mean, you're not on like a semester schedule anymore. There's no like set date by, you know, there's no like dates where anything needs to happen. And so you're in a project, and it's kind of you and your advisor deciding what a good goal is and then trying to achieve that goal. But it's so completely open-ended that that's very different. I mean, I think in the honors program, there was a good emphasis on doing undergraduate research and some individual study, which I think was helpful. But in undergrad, you're still on a semester schedule, and you still have like summer break and things like that. And so that adds a sort of background sort of scaffolding to your life sort of year to year, right? But that just completely goes away once you're in a PhD and you're out of your coursework. And so figuring out how to add that structure back in to sort of keep you focused and keep yourself on a schedule is I think one of the more challenging things, especially if you're doing like research, and, you know, if I try an experiment and it completely fails, and then I have to go fix 3 things, and, you know, stuff becomes irreproducible. You have a lot of unexpected hiccups that can make things frustrating. So doing your best to maintain a structure and a schedule in the absence of an externally imposed one, I think is the biggest difference between grad school and undergrad.
Thank you. Teddy, Chelsea, anything you want to add?
Sure.
Yeah. Oh,
Go
sorry.
ahead. Go ahead, Chelsea. Go ahead.
Okay. So because I'm in a much more traditional like school program, not more traditional, but like it's not research based, right? So I do have courses, I do have semesters, there's no breaks. Like I'm just I'm going to school straight for like 4 summers through the summer. So for me, what I really appreciated about UHP was how when I wanted to do my thesis, I needed to know what I wanted to do. I needed to approach the professors. I needed to have an elevator pitch. I needed to be the one to like, here's why you should help me. And that for me has been really helpful in school, particularly in my clinical rotations. Like when I come across a nurse in preceptor, when I come across a nurse on the floor that I'm like, hey, I really like what you do. You know, are there opportunities for me to shadow you? You know, what is staffing like? Is there going to be jobs here in a couple of months when I've graduated? Which, like, spoiler alert, all the nurses are quitting. So yes, there's jobs. It's rough out here, guys. Don't go to the hospital if you can avoid it. So just being a self-starter has helped me a lot. And just forming relationships. Like I had a clinical instructor this past summer that I really liked. I shadowed him where he worked. And now like we're friends because I saw him, I liked him. I was like, this is someone that I want to put in my deck of cards as a future resource, as a reference, as a mentor. So I think UHP really helped me sort of build a foundation for those sort of like networking behaviors.
Yeah, I think that for me, I felt exceptionally well. I was like exceptionally well prepared for like the academic rigor of grad school. I was like, bring on whatever experience, any amount of reading, I could handle that. But what the first year of the history program, and this points to, I mean, David said he only had 1 year of coursework. I'm a little bit jealous. The Penn history department has 3 years of coursework, which is a lot. Most programs, I think, at least in the humanities, usually have around 2. But the first year was really a lot about socializing you kind of as a historian. It was about like learning how to speak to other historians, other academics, about your interests and everything. And I found that really, really challenging. And it's something I'm still learning to do. And I'm not sure if I do an exceptionally good job of it. But I mean, and I guess like, now that I'm writing my dissertation, spending those like 3 years doing coursework where, and a lot of the courses, obviously, since it's like, they were not super applicable to what I was studying, so as an undergrad, you kind of value that, but when you're a graduate student and you like know what you want to do your dissertation kind of on, it could be frustrating at times. But what I realized kind of in the end was that I was learning basically how to take how to shape my interest into a project that not only could I express to other people, but other people would find interesting and engaging. And so that has been, it's been a slow growing experience. And since no one said it, it's a total cliche, but grad school is completely a marathon, not a sprint. And I think that, like if I would have applied the same like amount of like the way I worked as an undergrad, which I think I worked, I spent a lot of like most of my week doing, school related things. You cannot keep that up for an additional 5 years after you've already done it for 4. So I've had to learning how to find the, like the cliche work-life balance is like really important. So.
Well, let's take a little break from the questions I previously sent you. I'm going to throw a different one at you, sort of to respond to what Teddy just said there. Tell us something that you do in order to maintain your balance while in graduate school. And
I'll go for it. Chelsea, if you want to go, you can.
Oh, you can go first. You were first.
Okay. I spend a lot of time like cooking and hanging out with friends, basically, is what I do a lot of. West Lafayette, Indiana doesn't have quite the list of options for things to do as like maybe Philly or Manhattan or Minneapolis might. So let's see. But before the pandemic, I was doing a lot more intramural sports, but now those like sketch me out a little bit more. But I always do as much as I can to get out and hang out with people, and just sort of, well, yeah, I mean, I'm sure everybody changed their routines during the pandemic, but I spent a lot more time just like hanging out in my apartment and like cooking and making sourdough bread and stuff like that. So I've continued to cook a whole lot, and I make regular time to hang out with my friends, go to the gym. And I used to play a lot of intramural sports, but I don't anymore. So.
David, you are so well-rounded. It
doesn't always feel that way, but
you're better than me. Like, you love to cook. I like cooking. I don't like cooking for myself. And I also live in like the food capital of the US, so I'm like, what new takeout am I gonna find this week? So
you also have like the high rent capital of the US. So I mean, that's like slightly different. That adds some stress to things.
Give and take. Me, it's been a balancing act. It continues to be a balancing act for me, just because my program, the first part of it at least, is so condensed. So for me, like, self-care is not cooking. Self-care is, I'm going to heat up this Trader Joe's frozen meal because I'm too tired to concentrate on having to grocery shop and plan a meal. Or I have been staring at my computer from 7 a.m. this morning. It's now 5 o'clock. I need to go outside. And I mean, New York is a concrete jungle, but there are always like hidden little gems of parks. There's one like 3 blocks from me. Like, I need to go do some laps around the park because I can't be in this apartment anymore. Self-care for me is also, I need to call my mom. I need to FaceTime my boyfriend, or I need to take a nap. I think sleep is so important, and it's so easy to just like, I just need to do one more thing. I just need to do one more thing, just 10 more minutes. And sometimes, so it's been important for me during this time to recognize my own limitations and like cut myself off. Like, you put the patho away. You're not going to learn any more about the GI system tonight. Like, just go to bed. So outside time, green space, knowing your own limitations are all really helpful. And of course, friends, when you can, when nobody's like crazy busy or less busy.
Yeah, I find setting, I'm very fortunate that my partner has like a normal 9-to-5 job, and I work when she works for the most part. And obviously I sometimes work a little bit less, sometimes a little bit more, but I find that has been, because that first year I really did, we weren't living together, and I was like, working all hours of the day, and that just could not continue. So I more or less try and hold myself to a normal work schedule, and I find that's really effective for me. And all these other things, I also enjoy cooking. I'm into biking too. Those things, help you just make things a little easier.
Yeah, I've definitely tried to impose more of like a 9-to-5. So like, I'll try to be in my TA office at like a normal time in the morning, like 9 or 8, and then I try to just like, stick to work for that entire time. And then once it hits like 5 or 6, I can go home and be like, okay, like, it's time to rest. I also like to cook when I'm feeling like it, but I also like to nap. I've also gotten into woodworking, mostly because there's like good facilities on campus here, and you can use them for free. So if you ever need to make a gift, it's really cost effective there. But yeah, that's kind of what I've been doing with my free time.
Yes, there are all kinds of resources around universities that you probably aren't familiar with in your average undergraduate experience or graduate school experience. I recall one of the features of my graduate experience was you felt like, well, the English department at the University of Illinois was so big that you really didn't have to get outside of it. And pretty much my whole life revolved around that, except for Tuesday evenings and Saturday mornings when I would go play pickup basketball. over at the IM building, and just sort of connecting with a whole different side of the university student body there, which was good, even apart from the exercise and the sort of way to blow off steam uh, with that. Well, let's move on to sort of a tough question here that I'm sure is on a lot of people's minds as they think about graduate school, and that is, how do you pay for this? We've had a couple of suggestions this way. I know, one of the reasons I picked the grad program I did was because they basically promised me 7 years of being a teaching assistant, and that would cover the cost, and I was fortunate in that regard. But if you can, tell us a little bit about, what are the options out there, and how do you get involved in working out how to pay for your graduate education? And maybe we'll start with Teddy, since he already launched into this a little bit.
Yeah, so I mean, I can talk about maybe like stipends in the humanities. Basically, I mean, today, and I'll get into this later, the job prospects for a PhD in the humanities are not, or at least a traditional job, are not exactly like great. So I mean, it's very important that, when you find something, when you're looking at grad schools, that you take that into account, over the next 5 years, that you do need to make like, a living wage, because you're not sure what exactly is going to happen after that. And the good news is that a lot of programs do offer Penn, fortunately, and they have a ridiculous endowment, but a lot of like, elite private institutions, unfortunately, offer basically guaranteed funding for 5 years. And specifically, what I think the trend has been is to have less teaching obligations. I only had to TA or grade for 4 semesters, but there's more pressure on, you need to, they gave us an extra year due to pandemic interruptions, but they made it pretty clear that they would not be giving us another year, and you can apply for external funding, that kind of stuff, to get extra years. But the emphasis is definitely on you finishing your dissertation. That's like a major thing. And I guess what I would add, so I applied for and was fortunate enough to receive a Beinecke grant, and basically in there, I mean, I can talk specifically about the Beinecke, but there's lots of other things. The Beinecke itself is unique because I think you applied to it before, and they will give you some money before grad school, which is super helpful, because you have to pay for a rent at a place before you move there, and then they give you an extra yearly little stipend, which makes that graduate stipend go even further. And the other thing that I've been thinking about too is that throughout my years in grad school, there have been a lot of opportunities for what I find to be fairly well paid things. Like I TA'd a class and was paid extra, beyond my teaching obligation. There's even like little jobs depending on your specialty. Like I've translated things for people, and the pay is usually around $20 an hour, which is very nice compared to what you get paid as a work study student as an undergrad. There's lots of things like that, so that does make it helpful. So there's lots of ways to pay for it, but obviously, usually doing a PhD for the humanities, you're not going to be paying tuition, so that does make it a lot different. You might have to work to get a stipend or something, but yeah, usually that's the kind of deal you're looking at. But it's different for a master's, and I won't get into it all.
Thanks. Any perspectives from the world of engineering?
So when I was doing some research in the program, something I noticed, so I was looking for masters, and it seemed like a lot of programs were able to say something along the lines of like, oh, PhD students have like a more guarantee of having some sort of teaching assistant or research assistantship, whereas master's funding is more on an availability basis. So that was kind of a little nerve-wracking to me. So I also did a lot of research into external grants. I'm lucky that here at the U, especially because I continued on with my undergraduate, so I was pretty close with the faculty here, I was able to get a pretty good financial package to attend here. So I don't have to pay tuition, and I'm a TA, so I get a stipend that way. But I know it's not always the same for every institution. But yeah, I noticed like there was more of a guarantee as a PhD student than there was as a master's student. So that kind of definitely played a role in when I was looking into other programs at different schools.
Loans. I got some scholarships, but I noticed when I was looking that a lot of scholarships for nursing school are specifically for undergraduate, and that wasn't me. There are a lot of grants for like midwifery students, but that's also not me yet. So I was caught in this unfortunate, really obnoxious in between. So I was a saver. So I have had a pot of savings that I've been living off of, and then loans. But for me, knowing that I'm going to graduate and will be guaranteed a job sort of helps justify the cost for me. Additionally, because I intend to work with lower income, like lower SES populations, there's a lot of loan forgiveness in those areas. So loans, but I have no concerns about being able to like pay them off.
For me at Purdue, they guarantee PhD stipend funding for at least 5 years, and then anytime you're spending after that is going to be coming probably from your advisor. I mean, my funding right now does come from my advisor, so my advisor applies for grants, and the grants have funding set aside within them for paying for the tuition and stipend for graduate students, and so that's what I've been basically living off the whole time. And that's often how it works in PhD programs. Is you have your tuition gets covered, and then you have a grad student stipend to live off of after that. My experience is that, or my understanding, I should say, is that stipends tend to be pretty consistent within a specific discipline, regardless of where you are in the country, which is just kind of like a weird way that things have sort of turned out. And so that means that you'll have the same stipend in like a chemical engineering program living in like Berkeley or living in West Lafayette. So the sort of set stipend that you have means very different things depending on where in the country you're living. So even though I would like to live in sort of a more exciting place, the living costs have been fantastic in West Lafayette, Indiana. So that's another thing to keep in mind, I think, is sort of the purchasing power of your stipend if you're in a PhD program, depending on where you live in the country.
Okay, and I actually have a question here from Kelso in the audience who says, "Can you give me some pointers on undergrad research? What were some really effective research experiences, and how did you go about developing relationships with faculty to get those experiences?" And Kelso's a political science student, so he's probably maybe closest to Teddy in terms of what he's planning to do.
Yeah, this is a very good question. And I mean, I guess so obviously from like a kind of philosophical standpoint, you're developing, you should look first for a research that would be a way for you to start the research that you want to do in grad school. And obviously that may be putting the cart before the horse, because it's not like you don't need to have a solid idea of that. So from a more utilitarian standpoint, I would say that I think, those relationships with faculty are very important, because, they write you letters of recommendation, and that's an important part. But also like just the experience of like, maybe like writing a grant or something, or applying for things. And even if you don't, if you don't end up doing that, that's like a very valuable experience. So having like, if there are grants or something that you can apply for, that is like a great experience to do, because even if you don't get them, it's great practice. And I'm trying to think what else. Independent experience is good, but I mean, to a certain degree, you want to look what's available too, because you know what, I mean, so I was kind of concerned in grad school that like as an undergrad that like my writing sample be very good, that you know that they would not take me seriously as a scholar if I did not like produce like just a stellar writing sample. And I think, you know, I was proud of what I produced, and I think that lent me confidence in other areas. But I've more or less, I mean, I don't want to say they don't read it, because I think, you know, like the person that you were working with is probably going to read it, but that is not like, you know, huge part, make or break part of your application. I think it's much more the way you kind of, and applying for the Beinecke, Tim helped me learn this a lot, you know, the way you talk about the experiences that you have, it is very much like applying for a job. So, you know, you can, I don't want to say you can spin anything any way, that's not true, but, you know, I mean, you have to think about like how you can talk about the things that you've done. So, you know, I would say any experience is good, especially, you know, if it's something that you think you can talk about in like a, you know, an application or when you're applying for a grant. So hopefully that helps a little.
And anybody else want to add a science perspective or just your own personal perspective on that?
I can jump in a little bit. So I got into undergraduate research by approaching a professor who led a recitation section that I was taking, and I just really got along with him and enjoyed interacting with him. So I thought he'd be a good undergraduate research mentor. And so I did not apply at all based, like not on the research topic. It was based on the mentor, the research advisor. And so one of the things that I ran into is that I just sort of like, I wasn't that interested. I found I wasn't that interested in the very specific research project I was working on. And so I went and got some advice from another professor, and I was basically asking him if he thought I should switch to a new project and sort of get experience in a new area. And he gave me some advice that I think was actually pretty helpful. He recommended that I stick with the same project for the sake of like seeing like a full research project through, sort of like beginning to end, sort of like beginning of, you know, doing some experiments through writing a paper. And I think that was good advice. I think that was good to kind of see how that whole process works, going from experiments through writing a paper and submitting it and things. So I think there's something to be said for getting sort of longevity within a specific research project. That being said, I'm also like a little bit envious of my peers who were able to like test out different things in their undergraduate research. So there's a balance, but I think considering the benefit of spending more time in one project was something that I hadn't considered previously, and I'm thankful I got that advice. So.
Oh yeah, and just to add something that occurred to me, and this is like a big difference between different disciplines, but like, I don't know what kind of poli-sci research you're doing. I think if you were doing something a little bit more quantitative, this maybe is more difficult, but really it's, I mean, there's a lot of flexibility of who can advise you, and you might want to, the first undergrad experience I had was not, I mean, it was a good experience overall, but it wasn't like a great experience because I didn't have like a great it wasn't a negative in any way, it just wasn't as productive as it could have been, because I picked an advisor based on like their specific interests in relation to my specific interests. And I think I would have been much better off picking someone that would first be a good advisor, and then second, you know, be able to, you know, offer me some guidance. But they, you know, with any kind of research, they have a law, you know, they can offer quite a bit of guidance on things that are tangential, or maybe even it seems unrelated. I mean, I think this is probably different in the sciences because you're working much more with like, that person has a lab that works on that thing, you know, but so that's something to keep in mind too. And also to develop, you know, relationships with multiple people, I think is a good thing too. Because I think that I could be wrong about this, but you know, it sounds like in the sciences, it is a valuable experience seeing it through. Whereas I think that, I mean, it's a valuable experience to see it through in the humanities in so much as it is a valuable experience. But I don't think there's not going to be, you can do undergrad publishing and everything, but it's not the same as like publishing you know, you can actually publish a real paper, scientific paper as an undergrad, which is, you know, it's different, you know.
Yes, Teddy, I believe for your first directed research project there, you picked someone who was famously, sort of unfriendly to undergraduates. But it worked because you did the project, and he ended up being very impressed with the work that you did. And to impress somebody like that
Yeah.
was in itself a great accomplishment to be able to talk about.
Mhm. Yeah. No, so I mean, I guess that would be something I would also say. There are no bad experiences, really. I mean, there are, they're bad experiences are learning experiences. I shouldn't say that there definitely are bad experiences, but yeah.
All right, we've got a few more minutes here. I'd sort of like to hear from each one of you. Um, what's one really cool thing that you've been able to do as a graduate student? Uh, Maybe that it just was really exciting for you that you got a great deal of personal or professional pleasure out of it.
I'll go first. Because I'm interested in midwifery, my obstetrics rotation was like the best 10 days of my life. So being in the hospital, being able to do assessments and watch these brand like fresh, like babies who are 2 hours old, watching them, learning how to do assessments on them, and then also being in the room with people who are like birth never gets old. So just being literally in the room where it happens was the best thing ever. And I can't wait to do more of that.
That might be tough to follow up, but anybody else want to give it a shot?
Sure, and I'll give a kind of obviously, since I work on Italy, I got to go to Italy all the time, which is amazing. But I think that the thing that I would like to kind of highlight is that the best experience I've spent several times where I spent several months in Florence. I usually Florence doing research, and obviously that's been an amazing experience. But it's also like, I partly got into this because I love to travel, but when you go, and it's usually in the summer, you get stuck in Florence. It's so freaking hot, and it's a very touristy town that's very small, so it becomes this kind of thing that, and you're working in the archives, which some people find to be a rewarding experience. I've learned that is not an incredibly rewarding experience to me. There are other things I like to do, and one of the things that was, and it was something that the pandemic ironically brought me, was I wasn't able to do like usually people, you finish your exams and a lot of historians will just go spend a year in the archives, and that wasn't an option for me. So I kind of shifted to a more text-based project, which I think I ended up enjoying more. But what I was able to do, I had a small grant and it was expiring. And even though the archives weren't open this past summer, I was able to go spend some time in Tuscany, and I got to spend some time in like small towns and everything. And I realized, I was a little bit burned out because I was going to have to start writing my dissertation, and I was just dreading that. It ended up being much more enjoyable. I have been enjoying that immensely, and I would say that that's been the second best thing. But being able to like spend that time and realize, like all the time that I've spent in my education learning Italian, learning about Italian literature, and like actually speaking with Italians about this stuff in small little towns was like, I mean, you just can't beat it. And unfortunately, Florence is just, it's a bigger town, and more people speak English, and they'll speak English reflexively without, because my Italian isn't that great, but smaller towns, it was just such a great experience. So I mean, in a way, kind of, I mean, I guess it goes back to that work-life balance. I think for me, it was like always like, how can I maximize my time, the money I get to go spend time in archives in Florence, but separating the two and just saying like, I'm just going to go to Italy for fun, and then I'm going to have a more text-based project. That was, that was a very, a good thing, and I feel very fortunate the pandemic kind of forced that upon me. So yeah.
Well, I didn't get to go to Italy. That sounds pretty sweet. I have had pretty cool opportunities being able to travel to a lot of different conferences, though, which I guess sounds very routine and maybe sort of like you assume that it's like kind of, yeah, part of grad school or something like that. But What I did during the pandemic is basically a lot of conferences became virtual. So I just decided to like spam apply to a lot of conferences because all of them were going to be conferences that I attended from my desk anyway. So the cost of attending was greatly diminished because it wasn't in person. So I attended a bunch of conferences virtually, and then also I've done several in person, and getting the opportunity to see people from different companies, different universities, national labs, and the research they do, the way that they approach research is one really useful, just sort of, I guess, intellectually and listening to how they work through problems and things. But it's also really helpful to just sort of like humanize these people that you otherwise revere because they write some paper or do some project that you think is so cool. But then you're just like, oh, these are just like people, and they have like a really good idea, but they're just like still people. So I think being able to interface with people that initially seem sort of like unattainably smart, and then realizing that they're just like normal people, I think is a really, I guess, empowering experience. And it's also like nice and reassuring to see that. I also see that Ian said hello, so hello, Ian. Ian was my honors advisor and was very good at it, so it's good to hear from him.
Hi, Ian, as well. But I would agree also. I was able to attend the Society of Women in Engineering conference in the fall, and that was a really great experience. And I also got to see like some friends from my undergraduate years, so that was great to reconnect with them. I'm still pretty new to my research, so I feel like I don't have anything too groundbreaking to share. But it did help me land an internship this summer that I'm very excited for, which is with a company building hypersonic commercial airplanes. And so they offered me like a great way to apply the actual research that I'm working on here. So it's like a great streamline from research into industry, and I'm super excited for it. So I think that's probably the most exciting thing that my research has gotten me into. You are muted.
I am muted.
Oh,
Yep.
yeah.
Oh. And just here in closing, wonder if you have any last advice to give students, anything that you wish somebody had told you when you were an undergraduate thinking about going on to graduate school.
Yeah, and I guess, I mean, it's kind of back to that theme that I'll keep on going to, the work-life balance thing. Like, I always rolled my eyes when people would tell me that, oh, when you need something or someone to help you get through, and they'd be like, talk about their kid or something. And I'm like, oh, no, I'm, like my passion for history will drive me through. But it is, as cliche as it is so true that you do need someone in your life or something, some kind of, something that is not your work to help you get through, because no matter what, you will end up getting, especially in the humanities where there are not like a lot of, it's like if I stop doing my research, it's not like I'm materially making people's lives better. It is a lot of intrinsic things, and so you absolutely have to have something in your life to keep you going. And I was not really thinking about that when I was applying. Unfortunately, it has worked out, but it's something to keep in mind, because I think at the end of the day, there will be a day where that will come. And it was a surprise to me there. You wouldn't want to be identified solely just as a scholar or something, you'll need something else. So keep that in mind,
I would agree. I would say find your people, whether that's people that you have with you or friends that you make. Kind of gallows humor in nursing school, but like the trauma bonding that happens in graduate school is real, and you'll make some really good friends. I would also say that graduate school is hard, but that doesn't mean that you shouldn't do it, and likely you'll be better for it. And then on a more serious note, if you need mental health services, you should get them. Your school has resources for that, and it'll only help. There's no shame in seeking out help, and struggling in silence is absolutely the worst thing you can do. Don't do it.
think those are all, yeah, very good points. I think there are like two parts to the way that I want to answer this. So one, in terms of like something that I wish I had appreciated going into it more, was just how, I guess, like individualized the work is, and sort of solitary in a sense. I don't mean solitary in the sense that like I'm isolated in a room, no one's around me. Like I'm working in an office, other people are in my office and I'm talking to them all the time. But your work is like your work. Whereas in undergrad, if you were working on like a lab or on homework assignments, everybody around you is working on the exact same thing. So it's very easy to sort of talk through things with other people. But if you are doing your own research in a PhD, you're reading papers for your project, you're doing experiments for your project. And so there's less of sort of just like the communication about the work that's being done with your peers, because everybody else is doing slightly different work. So I think I took it for granted in undergrad just how helpful that is. So I think in grad school, it's really important to just seek out your peers and just like talk through how you're approaching the work that you're doing, as a way to sort of, as like a sanity check, to sort of get their advice, get their thoughts and opinions, and also just to say what you're thinking out loud to see if that even makes sense. Because sometimes you might say it out loud and you're like, oh, wait, what? Like that, what am I talking about? And then you can change your mind. So kind of building in that sort of group work that you don't automatically get in grad school, I think is really helpful. And then as a piece of like informed wisdom, I would say that PhD programs especially are sort of like ripe for being able to like exploit students basically. And so it's important that you advocate for yourself, because I have seen situations where people don't do it and it can turn out like pretty rough. It can like be really unpleasant for the students. So make sure you're like continuing to advocate for yourself and recognizing what is best for you and what's like unhealthy and what's unproductive for you, and staying away from those things and doing your best to work with your advisor or other people in your department to sort of make the experience as valuable as possible for you, because you have a lot of control over your circumstances, and making sure that you do what you can to sort of like actualize and create the experience that is most constructive for you, I think is something that's really important. So
Yeah, definitely to build on that. In undergrad, I was very much like a yes man. So if anyone asked me to do something, I would say yes, of course. But something my advisor told me like right away when I started grad school was to be incredibly selfish with your time. And he's like, if it's ever too much, just tell me. Like, you can tell me to back off whenever. He's like, if someone asks you to volunteer for something and you just don't think you have the time for it, say no. Like, it's a completely different ball game now with grad school, and you should like definitely be conscious of, since it's your first semester, you may not know or like be able to gauge how much time things are going to take. And I honestly didn't take his advice my first semester of graduate school, and I was really unhappy last fall because I was like always busy, I was always stressed out. But this semester I've been like, oh, I need to actually be selfish with my time. And so I've definitely like learned when to say no, what my limits are, and I found like things are going a lot better this semester. So definitely take the advice to be selfish with your own time.
Okay, that is all excellent advice. I wish I had heard that before I went off to graduate school. Um, I'm also thankful that you have been generous with your time here today and participated in this conversation with our live audience, and also with those who will be able to access this on the website. It'll be a very useful resource for honor students who are thinking about going on with their education in graduate programs. So thank you to the audience as well out there. I'm going to turn off the recording and we'll let people go their separate ways. If any of you want to hang around and talk with me for a few minutes or anything, that's fine, but we will officially end things